In this episode, expect to learn how we can better communicate what we're feeling inside, how we can start to look inside ourselves to find out what our true values are, and how we can begin to undo generational behaviors. My name's Sam, and I'm the host of the Lonely Chapter podcast. Today, we're speaking to Davina Hehn. Thank you for listening. This one was made for your enjoyment. Davina, if you could just start by explaining this unique angle that you're coming at with your coaching company, A Steady Space, and just explaining your shift protocols.
Yeah, so it took me a while to find this. I was clinically trained in psychology. I wanted to be a therapist. I got a master's in psychology. And then I just realized how few of us have the skills, the emotional literacy that would prevent us from going into therapy. Not that therapy's bad, but I worked in prison system, forensics. And so just seeing how few of us are taught these things growing up really showed me an area that was kind of lacking. And the therapeutic process, the whole therapeutic world is much more limiting when it comes to these skills-based things, that everything comes with a diagnosis and such. So I went a bit of a different route into the coaching space to teach these types of things. And it was throughout not only my experience getting certified in anger management and conflict resolution, mediation, this type of stuff, it was more so within my own day-to-day life that I realized that these things don't quite exist. And so the shift framework was actually bred from my husband by accident, by watching him find sobriety and work through that whole journey. And so I created this kind of step-by-step system of what I witnessed him going through and then what I went through by proxy, which was the S is ourself. It's leading with a level of self-awareness and knowing ourselves, typically to the depths that we're hoping to to dig into someone else's information, right? Like if we know ourselves well enough, then we can do any sort of behavior change that we're looking for. And then from there comes healing, which is really just a radical acceptance that I've done what I've done and I've been who I've been. And now I can give myself grace and forgiveness to try something new and different, which is our innovation. So we try pretty much anything new to break that cycle, to break that kind of stream. And then once we do that enough, we build fortitude. That mental grit, that self-efficacy, knowing that I can do hard things and I can continue to do them really well. And that ultimately leads us to any point of transformation. It's not like an entire transformation of self. It's not like the ugly duckling thing. It's more so these really small transformations that happen little by little over time until, now it's been about 4 years, a little over 4 years of me doing this work, continuously falling off, getting back on, and feeling like a very different version of myself than I was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so that's what I place. It's the framework that we do, no matter who I'm working with. It's a pretty standard across the board framework.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a really good framework to use, and the way you've laid it out there sort of really makes sense, almost step by step. You mentioned at the start about how people are emotionally illiterate, maybe. And I would say I totally agree. A lot of people probably are, myself included, potentially.
Yeah.
How should we be improving that? Is that something that you learn maybe at school? Is it before that? Is it both?
Such a good question, Sam. So I wasn't taught it growing up. I didn't have a bad childhood. There wasn't any significant trauma. Well, maybe, I don't know. My therapist disagrees, but I don't think that happened. But, for the most part, I think it's being coached from a young age about what emotions even are, what they feel like, how to identify them, how they register in our body, how to move through them instead of avoiding them or just letting them run the show. And so many of us aren't taught those things growing up. And so now I, as an adult, even through my master's and all of that, I was very illiterate and didn't realize. I thought I knew a lot, but I really just intellectualized a lot of it.
Right.
And I didn't quite feel much of it. I was constantly running away from myself. And so with most of the adults that I work with now, we start with the basics in the same way that when we're learning how to read, we start with the alphabet, learning what they sound like and all of that. We're doing that with emotions, of being able to name them and actually label and define them, how to recognize when they're actually hitting us before it's a bit too late. how to move through and navigate what it is to feel what I'm feeling and also express to others what I'm feeling. And really just it's a building block thing. But first and foremost, we tend to start with just a willingness to be curious about ourselves. And then we get into affect labeling, which is basically being able to label the emotions that I'm experiencing and make it more accurate for me and really expand that emotional vocabulary.
Yeah. And do you think people struggle most with feeling emotions and being honest with themselves? Or do you think they find it harder to explain externally what they're feeling?
Oh, that might be a tie. I think it's a really hard thing too, because I think where we misstep is focusing so much on what other people's reasons might be and what other people might be feeling, and maybe accusing them of what their thought process is and what their intentions are, and understanding their upbringing and giving them all of the reasons, excuses or explanations in the book for why they are the way that they are, and not doing that for us internally. So I think it's both and all. It's not really knowing what we're feeling inside. And even if we kind of get a feeling of like good, neutral, or bad, not really knowing what we can say to others to inform them, or really what we need to remedy it.
Yeah.
We're not taught this stuff growing up.
Yeah. And sort of going back to your sort of shift protocols that you spoke about at the start. So your most recent one is on parenting. But it's not a parenting program. That's very important to point out.
Yes, it is.
What led you to focus in on that area?
Oh gosh, I became a parent, and no, it's just so much of not anything that I expected. I guess I didn't quite know what to expect, but I didn't expect this. And seeing how much my husband and I struggled in the early years, and still to this day, with a lot of the responsibilities and the nonstop of it all, and the needing to help our children regulate when I don't even know how to regulate myself. There's so much that came through that. And especially in the first 5 years when we're sleep deprived, when our entire world changes, we've never been at higher odds against each other. We now all of a sudden don't agree on things. We don't get along. We have never seen each other so sleep deprived and overwhelmed and terrified. And it was a lot of that of my own experience and searching for programs and searching for these things, but finding parenting programs. And that didn't feel like it landed for me. It wasn't enough for you to teach me about parenting. I don't know how to be a parent. I don't know how to carry the weight of all of these responsibilities and not find myself just buried underneath all of it. And so much of this came from very little by little from court-ordered anger management, which is where I started, to then, maybe I can bring in my partner. Well, typically my wife. It was a lot of men on the tail end of an ultimatum, So then can I bring in my partner? And then, we're having struggles because we became parents, or we have some things going on with the kids, and I keep losing my shit on my kids, and, whatever this looks like. And then it very much progressed into a very natural, like, I'm struggling with this. So if I am, I can imagine many others are. And how can we create a community of us who can come together and actually share about what the hardships are without being perceived as bad parents, bad people who don't love their kids, whatever this is, because there's a lot of judgment and stigma in this world. And learn these skills that we can apply for ourselves without being deemed selfish, and recognize that it's a ripple effect.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a really poignant point that there's all these parenting programs and parenting classes before you have a child. And obviously I don't have a child yet, but I know people who go to them, and it obviously teaches you the practical sort of day-to-day life aspects of how you deal with a child. But it doesn't talk about the mental side maybe as much, or in the same way that you're doing here. And like that bit about speaking about the negative feelings, but not being perceived as a bad parent or hating your kids or anything like that. And I think that's
Yeah.
really important, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think so. I'm a firm believer in multiple truths being accepted, even if they actively contradict. And that's really what all of this is rooted in. A lot of the parenting programs are talking about, like, hey, here's what your kid is going through when they're having a tantrum. Here's what is happening in their brain. Here's how to assert these boundaries. Here's this, but not like, what do I do while I'm having a tantrum? Watching them have a tantrum. What do I do when, like, I cannot tolerate within myself hearing the rhythmic sound of their cry repeatedly over and over, over and over, when I'm already super stressed out and I'm already just at the end of my rope, right? And there's so many things that I did and ways that I behaved earlier on into my parenting, as recent as last year, that I'm not stoked on, that I really don't want to repeat, that I was disgusted with myself for engaging within. And the shame that I carried with that just encouraged me to go deeper and deeper down instead of seeking what it is that I need outside of me. And that's really what I'm hoping through the work that I do and my sharing my experiences in this, that it encourages other people to hear their story in my words and feel seen and understood, and that, like, they're not the only ones who love their kids and also hate the job of being a parent.
Yeah. I think obviously as being a parent, it must bring up a lot of negative feelings. Obviously there's loads of great feelings, and but you are going to get occasional feelings of frustration, maybe confusion, maybe resentment. Are these feelings because of things that we've not dealt with what's the question? Dealt with by ourselves? Are we sort of reflecting our own feelings onto the children?
Yeah, there is nothing that tested me more than becoming a parent, and certain things in my childhood that I didn't realize still affect me or affected me really at all. And it brings up so many of your childhood wounds, because there's so much of that it's outside of just the, wake up, get your teeth brushed, get dressed, clean your room, make your bed, cook dinner, these types of things. It's about all of those things that those represent. What was my experience like when I didn't brush my teeth growing up? What was my experience like when I didn't like what was being served at dinner? Did I have a choice? These types of things are going to come up. And for many of us, our whole goal is to give our children a better upbringing than we had. And then we have that dissonance of, well, that sucks. Like, they get that and I don't. And while we're happy for our kids, because this is why we're doing it for our kids, it's like a happy for you, sad for me. And then that grief typically registers as some level of resentment or short fuse or anger or aggression. And we don't quite know what to do with that. And then we act out on it and we regret, we feel bad, we say we'll do something differently. And then the cycle just continues because we don't know what to do differently.
And if someone's finding that they're doing that in their sort of parenting style, how do we move to sort of fix it? Is it looking at ourselves? Is it doing something with the kids?
Yeah, for me, where I will always start is with the parent, of really just, again, leading with any level of curiosity about ourselves rather than judgment or ridicule. It's about checking in with myself. Like, what kind of mood did I wake up in today? Regardless of the reasons why, am I more grumpy? Is my energy lower? Am I, resenting the rest of my day, trying to get out of plans, trying to cancel these things? What is happening for me internally that might trickle out into the way that I engage with my kids? And not because it has to be fixed right away, but because we just need to know what we're working with. Our subconscious mind is built from ages 5 to 7, sometimes up until 10, but typically around ages 5 to 7. And we, in our adulthood now, between 95 and 97% of all of our behavior, thoughts, actions, feelings, all of that is driven by the subconscious. So if those things were ingrained from when I was a kid and I don't have a working memory of much of that time, And now I'm just leading on autopilot. It's my job, our responsibility rather, to start taking back some of the controls and figuring out how they work. And the first way to do that is by building that self-awareness to just check in with yourself throughout the day. I recommend 12 seconds. I just like the number 12.
Okay.
Of like while you're brushing your teeth, take 12 seconds and like feel what's happening in your body. Figure out what you're feeling, maybe not even where that's coming from or what to do about it yet, but just acknowledge and accept that it's there and that it's happening.
Mm. And that thing you said at the start about being curious but not judging yourself almost. So that self-awareness and that self-reflection, but without the added bit, which so commonly we do as human beings, right? We look at how we're feeling and then we put ourselves down for feeling that way. And it just becomes this sort of self-fulfilling cycle of self-hatred almost sometimes. And it can really get people down. So how can we sort of look at stuff, or how can we be aware without falling into that trap?
Yeah, oh my gosh. And I like lived in there. I like swam in it till I was pruny. I didn't know how to give myself recognition of what I was feeling without carrying in some level of judgment for myself feeling that way. Because also it feels gross. Like it's not a great feeling to be, especially as a parent, to be sitting there with your kids and say, I hate this. Right? Like that goes against everything that we're taught parenting is supposed to be and what we are supposed to feel in parenting. And so just sitting with that is such a gross feeling that we just try to move past it and like, no. Like if I admit that, what else comes after I admit that? And one of the biggest things for me that I found to be helpful was just saying, okay, let me just see. Let me just like take a peek, see how I'm actually feeling, and then I can decide what to do about it. But I'm running away from myself and then taking it out on my kids. And then it's repeating that even worse, because now it's not only that I feel gross about how I feel gross about the way that I've made them feel. And they have no choice. They have to live with me. They don't know anyone different. They have to love me. I'm the center of their universe. And I'm taking that forgiveness, that grace for granted. And so where I pivoted it was, instead of like, okay, letting my ego run the show, it was, this is a responsibility I have for my kids in this way. And for the previous version of me that is just a kid walking around in an adult body, to acknowledge these things and give myself the grace and the understanding that I haven't yet and no one else has for me yet either. And so that's where it pivoted away from the shame of, if I feel this way, then I must be a bad human and bad parent, and into, well, if I'm feeling this way, there must be a reason I'm feeling that way, and that has to be valid. And so let me figure out what it is that I'm feeling so then I can decide what to do about it later. So it was much more about away from like the, why am I feeling like this? What's wrong with me kind of narrative, and more so into what is causing this in me? Like, I wonder where that's coming from. I wonder what that is. And leading more with like a separation of self in those kinds of ways, so I can separate myself from the behavior, from the experience.
Yeah. And sort of looking into the work that you do, one of the sort of ways that you describe these people that you work with and the people you're empowering is as transitional characters. Can you slightly elaborate on that term and what that means to you?
Yeah. So this is really just somebody who changes the path of our bloodline in a lot of these ways, in the generations, right? So we decide that certain things that worked for others that just so happen to not work for me don't have to continue. A lot of the time where we hear these statements of, well, that's just how I was raised. That's just what we do on holidays. That's just how I know how to do these things. I've never known any different. We've never done any different. And so my whole push is toward being a transitional character who just asks, well, why? Like, what is that continues us in this? We are no longer these kids in our parents' households. We do have a choice over these things, and we get to actively choose whether these things continue or not. And if there are certain things that worked for our parents or even worked for me previously that no longer do, it's more so giving ourselves permission to modify that without judgment or ridicule of the previous version of us or of our parents, or who it's their first time living too. Like, we have very different problems these days than they did. It's so much more about being the person who's willing to make that transition for the rest of the people in your bloodline, and they hopefully will make their own too.
Yeah.
But the ideology of this is the way it's always been done, and so that's what we should keep doing, is just what works so far against us. And we're here to evolve. And so why can't our parenting and our traditions and those types of things too?
Yeah. So you're speaking about bloodlines and generations. A lot of these actions then they're carried through from parent to child into the next child and so on. Is that how we see it?
Yeah, because it's not only, a lot of the time we talk about our kids inheriting things from us as if it's only about kind of what they look like and personality and disposition in these ways, temperament maybe. But what we're learning is that we're also inheriting brain structuring of how well we can navigate stress and overwhelm, what we do when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, what we do when we feel anger, and whether we have kind of those neural pathways, those neural structures in place to actually get through things without just going into meltdown. And so I read this study about how, of course, like when at the time of conception, that's the version that you get. And both of my kids were conceived when my husband and I were so wounded and so far from being at all healed. We were both, well, my husband was definitely still drinking. I was drinking way more than I am now, and was just so much more emotionally immature, illiterate, both of us. My goodness. And there should be a waiver. Like, I don't understand that. Like, everyone's just given permission. It's wild. I go through more to adopt a dog, you know?
Yeah.
And there's just that part that I sometimes look at my kids and I'm like, oh, sorry. That DNA was like a little bit not quite ready. Like, we weren't the evolved ones that we are now. But we really are. We're passing on all of this to our kids. And unless we are willing to be the person who carries the brunt of that, who builds stronger structures in our brains, who's willing to kind of strengthen that part of us, then our kids, we're going to manifest the same thing. We repeat what we don't repair. And so my whole push for that is to take what still resonates, take what still makes sense for me, what I find to be helpful, healthy, and then I get to leave the rest where it's at, as long as I don't go back on autopilot each time.
It's really interesting to hear that you sort of pick up some of those genes as well, and that brain pattern from your parents as well early on. How much of that can be overridden by consciously making changes, maybe as they start to get slightly older, maybe they see how one of their parents reacts with anger as their sort of go-to, and they sort of see themselves doing that a bit, and they make a conscious effort to sort of change that. Is that something that can be done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super familiar with a lot of the brain chemistry on that end. What I do know is that we have infinite capabilities of building neural pathways. And through that, we can quite literally change the structures of our brain. And so I know for me, I'm hoping to give my kids a little bit of a head start in understanding how they feel and what they're going through, and coaching them through that. So hopefully by the time, if and when they become parents, they won't feel so left out to dry in the way that a lot of us are too. But yeah, I think it's so much more about being willing to start just anywhere you are versus the kind of, well, if my parents hadn't done this, then I wouldn't be like that. And it's like, okay, well, you're right? Like you're not to blame for who you've been before this. You are responsible though for who you become after this. And so that's where we radically take the reins. I think a lot of us carry this and we feel burdened by having to be this transitional character. And I instead view it as a blessing. I think it's a beautiful opportunity that we have to do a lot of the hard work. And also living like that is really hard too. Living the way
Yeah.
that I was beforehand was hard. I was just not self-aware enough to recognize it. So now I have the opportunity to be that person.
Just that little reframe, isn't it? Changing it from something that has to be a burden to something that is almost exciting. You get to do, you get to change and become better. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think a lot of people will sort of talk down about things and almost use them as excuses rather than making an actual change and trying to take that step forward. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think there's definitely an element of responsibility that's got to come into it if people are serious about making change. Focusing in on that feeling of anger then, because that's sort of something you specialized in before, you said,
Hmm.
what for people who do find themselves getting angry easily or it's their sort of go-to response, what are some ways that they can start to manage that a bit better if they've become aware of it?
Yeah. So I'm a big advocate for accepting anger. I'm on this mission of my life to de-villainize it
Hmm.
because anger is a really good, beautiful, protective emotion. It's telling us where something feels not right, where things feel unfair, where there's an injustice somewhere. These things are really good indicators. They're trying to give us a message. Most of us haven't been taught what to do with anger. It's either put it down or shove it down and or let it out, I guess. And so what we typically equate anger with is aggression. And I draw a very strong distinction between those because anger is the feeling and aggression is the behavior that we do with that feeling.
Yeah.
So for me, it's much more about if we can de-villainize it and recognize that anger is just as real of an emotion as happiness, yet we actively seek happiness and we try to destroy anger. If we can just recognize that it's one of our primary emotions, it's a protective secondary emotion, it allows for us to see it as, okay, well, what message is it trying to give me? And then it's really just advocating for change. But because we don't know what to do, that energy tells us to just break stuff, to ruin stuff, to destroy. And so the very first thing with anger that I recognize, because I was not a physical expresser of anger, I was an internal shover downer and emotional kind of punisher when it came to anger. And so I really had to learn how I was problematic in these ways without realizing it, because I actually got into anger management in an attempt to fix my husband. He was an external expressor. He broke stuff, punched stuff, never was worried for my safety by any means, but we replaced a good amount of doors.
Just on that, the
Yeah.
external versus internal. So external is obviously, it's quite obvious, like you said, they're breaking stuff. What does the internal anger look like?
The internal anger is going to look like either bringing it in and villainizing them or bringing it in and villainizing yourself.
Right.
And so a lot of that will lead to self-deprecation, self-hatred, or, severed relationships that didn't quite have to be severed in that way, maybe to that degree as they did. A lot of us who end up kind of numbing out at some point in our relationship, it's usually because we've been repressing so much for so long that at some point that protective part of our brain is going to just call it for us and numb us out. And so I didn't quite realize how problematic I was and how much I was contributing to the problems within my and my husband's dynamic, because he took center stage. He made himself known that this is how I feel. I'm really big about it. I'm causing damage in more ways than one. And so it allowed for me to not have to take a look at myself.
Right.
And because he wasn't open to finding a provider to work through that with, I, of course, being just someone in a helping profession in mental health, was like, I'll fix you. So I desperately wanted this relationship to work. I love this man so much. And I knew that that wasn't inherently who he is at his core. I saw a man who was struggling and suffering and didn't know how to let help in. And so I got certified in it, and it was my very first day in this certification. I'm surrounded by all these other therapists. And it was about 30 minutes in when, in the movies when they zoom in on this person and it's the walls are coming in because they're just having this realization. That's how it was for me. I was like, oh no, I'm not here to fix my husband. I am here because I am inherently like wounded too. And I'm contributing so poorly. And no wonder this man is smashing walls and all of this. I'm trapping him in a corner. It's actually quite impressive that he didn't have a bigger reaction to me than he did. And so much of that came from learning everything that it is here. I learned in my anger management certification what I didn't learn in 2 years of my master's, which was emotional intelligence and boundaries and communication styles and how to feel these things out and find words for them. And so what I learned during that program was that anger isn't something to be villainized and to be extinguished. It's instead something to be honed. And it really is very much a compass for us to know where our values lie and when certain things or people or experiences fall outside of those values and then what to do about them.
Yeah. And that sort of honing of anger and sort of regulating it rather than just suppressing it or letting it come out in rage.
Mm-hmm.
How can we start to do that, sort of honing it? And what are we honing it for? Where are we going with it?
So a lot of it is, one, again, just leading with curiosity about it, of like, what is it about that upsets me so much? And while we'll typically give ourselves a really quick answer on the very front, right? My kid rolled their eyes at me. Of course that bothers me. Well, but why? Like, what is that? Well, it feels disrespectful. Okay, well, what does them rolling their eyes equate to disrespect? Like, how does that work? Well, it brings up feelings in me that I'm not important, that I'm devalued, that they don't respect me enough to make me feel like my words matter, right? Okay, well, where does that come from? And we really get to like dig in deeper to these things to determine what my anger is actually trying to tell me. And so if we're willing to, it really just tells us either something is wounded and that could use some healing, some attention, and or I'm looking for something to change here. And a lot of us, use blunt force to change things instead of finding more, creative solutions to the problems that we're having. So if we can see that anger is an indicator that something just isn't right, sometimes it's because that part of our brain is just getting it wrong. And other times it's because there's actually a threat here and I get to decide what that threat is and then figure out a solution to resolve it.
You got to dial in on exactly what it is. And it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like going down the steps into a basement, I suppose. And on each level, you sort of see a bit more and you say, okay, what's the first level? Okay, but why? And then every step is a new question. Why? And you sort of dig down
Yeah.
until you find that answer, until you're in the basement.
Yeah, I think there's usually the number 7 is used. Like ask yourself why 7 times. I don't like starting things with why because I think that already puts our defenses up. So I like to, and our words matter, right? Like our brain hears everything we say. And so what I like to pivot that into is like, what about that? What is it about that bothers me? And so now when it comes to things like my kids rolling their eyes at me because they're 5 and 8 and they are fiery young men, it's so much more about that of, okay, well, that instills something in me. And do I want that to continue? Do I still feel like that's a valid way for me to determine their respect level for me is how they act when they're overwhelmed?
Yeah. Well, you just said there about changing the wording as well. There's a great book called Why to What by Dakota Meyer,
Ooh.
which he's a US Marine veteran. And it's a great book. It's quite a short book, but I got a lot of takeaways from it. And it came out sort of late last year. But the idea is exactly what you just said there. So it's changing that wording when we're sort of looking in or looking at an action rather than saying why, which sort of brings up a defensive mechanism almost, because it's like, it's questioning. It's really, why did you do that? Rather than saying what led you to sort of do that exact thing. And just by changing that wording, it's just bang on. It's exactly what you just explained there. So
Oh, wow.
that's cool. Definitely read that.
Yeah, I'll have to read that.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I learned in some of the parenting things that I did was we're not supposed to start questions with why with kids. because it immediately puts them on the defense, and it immediately gives that kind of impression that there's a right answer and you better get it right. And so it automatically puts us within some level of fight or flight. So I need to read that book though.
Yeah, really good. There's loads more little takeaways from that. So let me know how you get it. So looking at sort of our communication as couples and as we bring children into that life, obviously we've been couples without a child for so long, potentially, or maybe not, but now you're adding a child to that. You posted a stat a while back about how that can be changed. So in the first year of being with a child, your communication can reduce by 40% in the first year. So talk me through that and maybe why that happens and how whether we can avoid that or minimize it at least.
Yeah, parenting or becoming a parent is something that we are all, we're supposed to want throughout our lives. It's supposed to be this once that happens, your life really starts. And what happens a lot of the time is that we're both just constantly in a state of fight or flight, right? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not responsible for this whole being. And what ends up coming through are our roles change. So it's no longer that both of us are supposed to prioritize our relationship. There tends to be something that shifts there, in that one of us usually thinks that the child should be prioritized and the other person thinks that the relationship should still come first and then the child can be second. Yeah. And that comes down to this anecdotal theory that I have about whether we were born to be parents or partners. And it doesn't mean that we can't do both. It just means that we view the world in one way or the other. And that will drive our expectations. And so in the especially the first year, one, it's a very stressful, traumatic thing. Just getting baby out can be terrifying. Mm-hmm. And then now everything has changed. I can't use the restroom by myself anymore. I'm constantly living for this other being to keep this other being alive. And then our relationship, we can start resenting it, because then it's like, okay, well, I'm just trying to figure this out because I'm all out of whack, and now I still have to figure you out. And so we tend to go much more within ourselves during that time. And when we're sleep deprived, that part of our brain that assesses for threats and determines what a threat is 60% more easily activated, which doesn't mean that it's better at deciphering threats. It's just more likely to get them wrong.
You think there's more threats than there are?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And almost everything feels like it's a make it or break it. We're walking on eggshells, and that becomes our new flooring, and we don't quite know how to navigate this. And so it's what I experienced, and what a lot of the couples I work with, or parents in general that I work with, share with me, is that it's just not worth it. I don't have a lot of confidence that we can argue and get to somewhere better than we were before the argument. And so let's just not talk at all. And we really do try to just put our heads down and push through that period. And that's why I'm not sure the stat on it, but gosh, I just read it the other day and now I can't remember it, what the stat is for people who separate within the first year or two of becoming parents. And it's staggering. Because it's just day in, day out. It doesn't feel like you're ever going to get out of it. It's like a really long fever dream, and we lose hope. And we also see really wounded, kind of ugly versions of ourselves, of our partners that we didn't see before. And then we start questioning everything. And it just becomes such a hard thing that reducing by 40%, I think, is a little generous. I think it would be much further, much kind of quote unquote worse than that, because we just don't know how to do that. And then you factor in people who don't have help from family and friends. And then you factor in people who do, but then they overstep. And then we get into in-law issues and that stuff. And it's a recipe for disaster if we don't know what it is that we're actually looking to achieve and what we're really working with here.
Yeah. So sort of having an honest conversation sort of before the time, and then sort of going forward throughout that first year of parenting, sort of having regular check-ins, being honest with each other, and again, not having that judgment, I suppose, when you do say, I did find this annoying or whatever it is, that it doesn't then become a conflict or something.
Yeah, it's conversations that we're not told to have. Right? Like I read all of the books. I had all the apps of like what to expect when you're expecting and baby's the size of a pea and now baby the size of a lima bean, like these types of things, but there really wasn't much about us. Right? It's how to take care of baby, how to put baby down, how to do these things, but not here's how you guys can remedy these feelings of resentment. Here's how to approach these conversations. Here's how to kind of work through those things within yourself and what's your attachment style like and what does that mean and how well do we navigate adjustments. And the amount of diagnoses that I have gotten since becoming a parent are many. And I think it's just a wild thing that if we were to look at most of my experience, a lot of this was a lack of skills, not necessarily some sort of imbalance that I have. And so there's that part that I think we just kind of fail to recognize. And so if there were things, if we were given more guidance about what we could be focusing on, what we'd benefit from focusing on, trying to stay away from the shoulds, what we would benefit from focusing on, I think it would set us all up for a lot more success because expectations drive happiness in my book. I think expectation management is probably the number one thing, and being open to those expectations changing and communicating about what those look like is massive. And so that's why the parental shift is mainly for parents within the first 10 to 12 years of parenting and for anyone who is considering becoming a parent. That I think would be, of course, much more beneficial is to get within more of a preventative route as opposed to a reactive, retroactive one.
Yeah, for sure. And that thing you mentioned in there at the very start a while back about the default roles that you sort of have this theory that people are either sort of parental or partnership sort of based. You just talk me through those and sort of why you think that is the case.
Yeah. So I knew from me that I was not born to be a parent. I could have gone either way. We got pregnant on a whim and it's just, I'm grateful. And it's like, oh, I don't know that we deserve to be able to do that easily. And for me, it came with a lot of crises. I saw a positive test and there wasn't joy in me. It was sheer panic and fear and like, oh my God, what did we do? And it really only does take one time. They're not messing around about that. Like it really is this like, holy moly, like my life is never going to be the same and I don't know how to do this. And beyond that, I don't even know that I really want it. And that became such a part of my fear and my identity. And because I didn't know how to admit that or work through that, I just shoved that all down as something wrong with me. And so then I take people like my sister, who was brought up loving babies, babysat as often as she could. All she's ever wanted to be as a mother, and she's a phenomenal one. And I look to her like, oh, what would she do? Oh, okay, she'll like decorate the room for St. Patrick's Day. That makes sense. Like that doesn't come naturally to me. And her life, her identity felt like it would be more secure, more fulfilled and whole in the role of mother. And I could have gone either way. And there's plenty of people that when I ask them this, they fall within one of two categories of what would you do if you never had a kid? I would feel incomplete. And then the others would say, oh, I don't know. I'd probably like have moments of feeling like I missed out on something, but for the most part, I'd be fine. And when we take those into our relationships, and especially when we have partnerships where there's one or the other, that's usually where we see a lot of conflict. And so then I kind of started carrying this through and checking in with more of my clients and like asking some of these questions that I've eventually turned into a quiz of like, are you born to be a partner or a parent? And gives us a little bit more insight into the way that we view the world. It really helped us understand that just because I view the world this way and they don't, doesn't mean that like, it's like, what's wrong with you? We just view the world in a different way and our roles within it. And so with that came, okay, well, if you were born to be a parent, here's where your priorities might lie and why your relationship might be, third, fourth, seventh tier because their whole identity, they feel whole by being a parent. That was the whole point in all of
Yeah.
this. And those of us like me who could have gone either way, I am quick to feeling like my kids get in the way of my marriage. That like I want time with just my husband and I don't put as much emphasis with the kids. And it doesn't make me a bad mom. I work very hard to be a great one. It just means that certain things come more naturally to me than it does for others.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting sort of theory. And I think, yeah, it rings true. It's definitely people who you look at and go, they're almost scarily good with children. They should definitely be a parent. And then other people who just don't want kids, never wanted kids, never want them in the future. And yeah, complete opposites almost. But yeah, sort of taking from both sides and not judging each other as well on that as well. So a lot of the
Yeah.
stuff that we've spoken about today has been, I suppose, comes down to communication, right?
Mm.
So talk me through what makes good communication, just the basic fundamentals of good communication.
Yeah, I think first it comes with the communication that we have with ourselves, right? Like I have to know what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and be able to articulate it well enough to myself before I even try to communicate it with someone else. And what we tend to do is take raw data based on like how I feel in that exact moment, and then we share it and we try to do, and we don't quite know even what I'm looking for, what I would like to see changed. We're just talking at each other. We're not really communicating. And so the very first thing that I suggest starting with is figuring out what it is that you actually feel and think, and how realistic is this that this would replicate tomorrow? Is this a fleeting experience, or is this one that's more, it's around to stay, it's sticking around? And then from there, it's so much more about our approach. I know that there are cultural expectations of like whether it's the person speaking or the person receiving the information that the burden of the benefit of the doubt falls within. And I place so much more on the speaker. We hear a lot about active listening and these types of things. And if you were to Google active speaking skills, you would see people giving presentations or speaking in front of a crowd, and not about just one-to-one, about if I want them to understand me, I don't think it's on the person listening to have to figure out and read between the lines of what it is that I'm saying. I place a lot of emphasis on, if I want to be understood, that burden, that responsibility falls on me in order to articulate myself in a way that it could be more of a no-brainer for them. And then knowing who I'm talking to and the certain things that might spark them or not, that's where I can make these modifications. So a lot of the time I get some pushback where people say that I'm different with different people. And my whole point is, well, yeah, fundamentally at my core, my value system is the same. And now, geez, growing up, no, girl had no idea who she was. She was, constantly changing. But this version of me knows who I am and knows where my values lie. And there's a common thread all of the time around who I am and the way that I engage. And also, I parent each of my kids differently and I speak to them differently. So why wouldn't I be different based on different people and speak to them in different ways? So that part of communication, of knowing yourself and also knowing your audience and practicing assertive communication, which is a very challenging skill to hone, is very, very much one of the top things that I think we kind of have to do if we want to forge better, stronger relationships.
Yeah. And that people who sort of say you act differently around different people, I'd sort of tell them to look at themselves and think, would you be the same with your sort of best friend who knows all your secrets and everything, and someone you've met for the first time and is interviewing you for a job? You're going to be completely different. So, but like ultimately, you and yourself are the same person, the same values. You're just communicating in slightly different ways.
Yeah.
And talking about that, so different styles of communication, obviously there's sort of like passive aggressive style, there's assertive, aggressive. I don't know how many there are. Are there ones that we should be using, some we shouldn't? Do they all have a place?
Yeah, I mean, I think we fluctuate through them. I know about 10 to 15% of the population, or 10 to 15% of the time that people are communicating falls within the assertive, which is just a travesty. It would be inversed if it were up to me, but that's usually the tried and true. And then
Right.
we have passive aggressive and passive aggressive. So each one has their positioning, I think, and there is room for all of them to exist at some point. I don't know about the passive aggressive. I would guess maybe passive, then aggressive, and then assertive. I don't know that passive aggressive really helps any of us. But really, passive is just at some point I learned that staying quiet keeps me safe.
Yeah.
And so I'm much more likely to shove things down, to maybe even fall within the passive aggression, just when like I've had enough and I just don't know how to navigate actually expressing myself. I was previously incredibly passive. And so for me, going into the assertive felt very aggressive and felt very passive aggressive. I didn't quite know how to just like say what it is that I'm thinking and feeling in a neutral way and not be like, oh, are you mad at me? Like, oh, like, but I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but like, don't, you know? And then we have the aggressive, which is where either they were quieted so much growing up that they never had a say, and now they're kind of making up for lost time in their adulthood, or they've just learned that the loudest person in the room will be heard the most. And so I'm going to lead with that aggression. I don't really have to worry about how you'll feel about it. Your feelings are your feelings and my feelings are my feelings. And however I need to get this out is my right. And that, of course, has its own problems in and of itself. And then, the passive aggressive is usually just trying desperately to avoid conflict, but not being able to sit with it not being shared. And so
Yeah.
I'm just going to like breadcrumb it and then walk it back if I can.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to let you know that it bothers me, but I don't actually want to address this. I don't know how to address this, but like, you bother me. And just know that. And
Yeah.
then we kind of
Pretty
just like
common,
keep it
I'd
going.
say.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So assertive, you said you would have it the other way around. So you said most people sort of maybe should be more assertive. What does that look like? And how can someone like you did yourself, who might be passive or in those sort of passive aggressive tendencies, how can they
Mhm.
start to move to being more assertive?
Yeah, I think it becomes yet again broken record about knowing what it is that you are actually trying to achieve, what it is that you're actually feeling. And for those of us who are passive and then we go into assertive, it feels aggressive. For those of us who are aggressive and we go into assertive, it feels soft.
Right.
And so more than anything, we want to ask ourselves whether the way that I'm communicating is rooted in raw emotion or more like digested emotion. How much of this have I actually sat with and understood about myself? And am I sharing it in a way that is very passionate? Or is it a bit more neutral? And so this is more of a diplomatic approach. I typically go by the rule of if it still bothers you within 24 hours, you address it within 48. And it gives you some time to sit with it and decide and figure out what it is that you're actively feeling. And with assertive communication, it's not just about, well, passive really doesn't say anything. Aggressive says everything. And then passive aggressive is just like veiled, right? And so with the assertive, we need to know what it is that I'm actually expressing and have a goal in mind of what I'm looking to achieve from it. A lot of the time when our arguments go in circles, it's because, okay, well, now we're just working with raw data and our emotions are getting built back up, but now we don't know what to do with it. And if we don't have a goal set, then we will continue in that circle. So for the assertive, you just want to be direct and honest and filtered.
Yeah.
Right? Like we want to finesse the way that we're sharing it because I want to be understood. I'm desperate to be understood by the people who I care to understand me. And if that's the case, then I have the burden, the responsibility of expressing it in a way that is more factual, not just emotional. And I've already considered your perspective. I'm already weighing that in. I'm already giving you the benefit of the doubt. And this is what I'm looking for moving forward. So we almost come together we approach them with a solution that doesn't only mean that they change, It's more so about, hey, here's the solution. Here's what I'm looking for from you. Here's what I will do to facilitate that. And can we move forward? A lot of the
Yeah.
assertive communication is boundary setting, and
Yeah.
boundaries also we can get into if you'd like. I
Yeah,
hear
we
your
will in
wheels
a
turning though.
moment. We will in a moment. I just so it seems like a lot of this stuff, it all starts with looking internally first. And would it be fair to say there's like an element of, again, that sort of spiral, downward spiral of maybe if it's a couple, if I start to become more assertive, maybe I'll upset her, maybe then she'll leave me and then I'm single. Like it's almost that catastrophizing in your own mind before you've even made the change. So you just go back to your sort of safe in what you know
Yes.
feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that too comes down to the expectations. A lot of us tend to, we see something on socials, we read a book, we decide that we're going to do something differently. And then we don't express it to our partner. We don't tell them or the people around us, like, hey, I'm working on this. So those of us, the people around us, have no choice but to assume that our narrative isn't changing, that like the version of the other that we're witnessing is the same one that I had a month ago, a year ago, a decade ago. And so if we are wanting to make these changes, you share that with the people around you. With each of the things that I'm working on within myself, I'll tell my husband, hey, I'm noticing this about myself and I'm not stoked on this part of it. So I'm going to try this for a bit. And just so you know. And so that way, when I am more assertive with him and I am voicing more complaints, he won't just be like, what is happening? And where is this coming from? And oh, you've been harboring all this hatred for me for years, and kind of just like going into the defense mode that naturally we will get into. But if we share with the people around us, like, hey, here's what I have going on and here's what I'm trying to work through. Here's where I could use some support from you and maybe even some patience and maybe some extra grace while I'm navigating this, and you tell me what works and what doesn't, and we kind of get to trial and error this together. It makes it so much better. And before I started doing this work as a parent, I would kind of just like change stuff and not tell my kids. Or, I mean, given they were quite young for a good amount of time, but a lot of it ended up looking like, hey, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm sorry. I yelled. I'm sorry I raised my voice. And like, I'm not going to yell anymore. And then I'm going to yell again because I don't know what to do without that. I don't know what to do instead. And so now that looks like me going to my kids and being like, hey, I know I got loud earlier about this. Yep. We noticed. And then it becomes, well, this is what I was feeling. And just because I was feeling that doesn't mean that I get to treat you in this way. So I'm not sorry for how I felt. I am sorry, though, for what I did with my feelings. And here's what I'm working on. Right? And does that make sense for you? Is that something that you want me to work on? Where do you need me? What more or less do you need from me? And we get to do more of a collaboration so I can tell them, okay, I'm working on not raising my voice. And when those times come, I will tell them like, hey, this is the level of frustration that I tend to get to when I start raising my voice. Could you please show me that my words are important? And can we really work together to like work through this? And then they tend to reframe, and sometimes they're just like, no. And then that's my own work to do to figure out what to do with that. But it's a lot of that of keeping the people around us informed, because they will hold you to previous narratives and then you will determine that that's them not supporting you. But if they don't know what is changing and you've conditioned them to expect this version of you, they are going to not like it. You're changing something in the status quo, and that's going to be unsettling for them too.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point I've never really thought of is, just letting someone know that you're trying to change something, however small it may seem to you. Like you say, it's going to disrupt what they know as the sort of standard. So tell me a bit about boundaries then. You mentioned it a moment ago, and let's dive into some boundaries. So how do you start setting boundaries? What's that conversation look like?
Yeah, well, we have to recognize the difference between a boundary and control. A lot of the time we use boundaries as forms of control and just label them as boundaries so we can get away with it. And so what we typically try to figure out is like, what do I want to change? And what is it about that I want to change? And what do I think that will benefit? And then how can I go about doing that? And if there any of those answers is, well, if those other people have to change, then that's control and you got to reset. And you have to ask yourself, what's within your control, what's within your influence, and what is neither. And for the most part, the people around us are at our influence at best. Even like control your kids, like try. You try. You can't. And nor should we. I don't think so. But there's that part that really all that I have actual control over is me, my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, my behaviors. And so anything within there will fall within a boundary. So the example that I tend to give is, say, Sam, you and I end up in a conflict and you start yelling at me. What people, especially on social media, will say is that the boundary is that you are not allowed to yell at me. That is a boundary of mine.
Right.
And it's not. That's telling you what to do. That's not a boundary for me. That's me trying to control your behavior. My boundary would be, I do not tolerate being yelled at. If you're going to continue yelling at me, I will be leaving. Right? It's you can do pretty much whatever based on whatever the law says and whatever happens with that. But I can't control what you do. What I can say is that I refuse to be treated in this way. That's not something I'm willing to engage in across the board, no matter who I'm speaking to. And this is just something that I do not tolerate. And boundaries are meant to keep people close to you. We set boundaries so that I can keep people in my life and we can have this exchange. It's a fence. It's not a wall, you know? And a lot of the time we use them poorly because we would rather tell other people how to change instead of us holding ourselves accountable to seeing it through. And then everything goes haywire because, yeah, I'm being controlled. So for me across the board, I do not tolerate being called out of my name. I don't tolerate being screamed at. And that's where, even with my kids, that's what I tell them. My younger son, he's somewhere within a sensory processing challenge that we're working through. And he tends to play really rough, hit really hard, and move his body in ways that like he just doesn't realize how big he is and how much strength he has behind him. And so what you'll hear me say, and I said a couple of times this morning and last night, I say, I do not sit near people who hurt me. If you continue moving around like this, I'm going to move across the room. I still love you. I still like you. I am just unwilling to be hurt. And so it's really just setting that of like, regardless of what the world does, what are you going to do about it? And that's where our boundaries lie.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, again, yeah, we sort of resort to that blaming other people or looking externally, but again, it's all internal. I think everyone listening's got a lot of internal reflection to do after this.
Well, yeah, it's gross. A lot of the like, and here's where I think because doing this work feels really good after, we tend to put a toxic positivity spin on it that like this is supposed to feel good. It does not. A lot of the doing this work feels really atrocious, and I run away from it often. And it's not that it's supposed to be easy. It's just supposed to get me closer to where I'm trying to go. It's building a muscle. I don't want to go to the gym and lift weights, which is why I kind of don't. But like, that's that part that if I want to, if that's important to me, I have to go through. I have to do the reps. I have to do this work. And this stuff is really important to me. And so even though there's days that I miss leg day or I'm going to do these types of things, I'm still going to know that ultimately I have to put in the work. I have to go through that pain in order to get the result that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So I don't want anyone to think that doing this work will be easy by any means. It's not at all.
Yeah, disclaimer.
Yes.
When it comes to conflict then, so obviously conflicts can happen between sort of parent and child. It can happen between couples, anyone really. One of the common responses that people might have as well in that moment is to just apologize, whether they think they've done right or wrong, but just to sort of diffuse that situation. I'm just going to apologize until they sort of move on. And I suppose it's a sort of passive style, but maybe slightly different. What difficulties can that cause going forward? If that's your go-to response.
Yeah, it's such a good question. It causes a lot. And I know that in certain ways, like if it's someone I'm not going to see again, right? Like if I cut someone off in traffic, I'm going to go out of my way to say sorry. Even if they are the ones who are merging in my blind spot, whatever, I'll still be the one to acknowledge it because that doesn't take anything away from me, right? And people are unpredictable. Everyone is the main character in their own life, and I'm just an obstacle in their way. So
100%.
for a lot of ways, that's me just like, sorry, yeah, okay. And when it comes to people we actually care about, I will quite literally never suggest apologizing just to keep the peace, because what that's doing is taking full accountability. You're eating up all of the blame here, and if you don't believe that that should be on you, you're now conditioning them to expect that of you. So if you apologize this time just to keep the peace, and then another situation comes up that rhymes with that one, and this time you're like, nah, I'm not in trouble, then the last one's going to be opened up. And the last one's going to be opened up. And you're basically setting the precedent that you are the one to blame. And if we don't fully understand what the other person's complaint is, and or if we just don't really care to hear it and we just want to move through it, do that. Just know that when you do that, you are choosing short-term comfort for long-term dysfunction.
Yeah.
And while there's room, it's not really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I can see where that causes problems, probably more for the future rather than in the immediate. But in that immediate, obviously the other option, or not the other option, but the other potential is obviously that conflict to escalate into something maybe ugly and definitely not useful. How can we avoid that escalation and sort of find that middle ground between just giving in and conflict?
Yeah. And I do want to make a point too about just apologizing to keep the peace isn't necessarily only about the other person. Like, you know what you're doing, and you're apologizing for something that you don't believe that you should carry, which then means that you'll stop trusting yourself and your own perception of things, and you will make yourself small so other people can feel big. And that's, of course, like, you suffer more than anyone when that comes through. I know that it can feel like that's just what I have to do. It's like that's all they're wanting from me is to say sorry. And I mean, I see that and it makes sense. What I think works against us, though, is that if we aren't coming up with an actual remedy in acting in prevention of something, then yeah, words are just words. And I teach my children often that words are not just passive statements, they're promises towards change. And so unless we're actively saying, yes, I am sorry, and this is what I'm sorry for, and here's what I'm going to do about it differently in the future, or attempt to do differently in the future, it's not really going to mean anything. Your words are going to fall on deaf ears. Some people just want to hear other people say sorry. And unfortunately, that's their stuff. Like, that is their work to do. And you are just, you're just along for the ride, unfortunately. But more than anything, I think it's fair to incorporate and. I'm a big and person. My clients know this. My sister just pointed it out the other day. She's like, you say yes and a lot. And it's because I believe in multiple truths that, hey, husband and I got into a conflict. And when I'm taking accountability, I will say, hey, at this point in there, I can see how I came through very passive aggressively. I was rude, whatever that is. I'm really sorry for that. And here is where I was harmed by you. And usually what we hear is like, I'm sorry, but what about you? Well, I'm sorry, but what about when you did da, 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 da? And we miss the point. It's like we have to like land one plane before we can take off in another. And so if we can recognize that in any given argument, there are at least dozens of ways that each one of us could take accountability. And so that's what we try to do, is really dissect it into like, hey, my approach to this was really poor. What I was trying to talk about is still valid for me and really important for me. And the way that I approached this was really not cute. And I really am sorry for that. What would work for you better next time, do you think? Like, I took extra time. I thought I was being assertive and it came through as aggressive. And so like, how would you prefer that I bring these things up to you? And if the answer is like, just don't bring it up, then that's its own problem. And that's something that we can deal with later. But a lot of it is like, okay, out of all of these things, out of this entire 20-minute argument, we both erred so many times over. I took every piece of bait that you gave, I chomped it right up happily, and I didn't keep my eye on like what the prize really is, which is peace. And so if both of us are on the same page, that we can see that there's multiple things happening, and that both of us look at what apologizing means to us and whether we find that to be humiliating or empowering, these types of things are going to allow for us to figure out how to best argue. So now my husband and I argue. We don't fight sometimes, but we try not to, because then once things are just getting too big, we're just like, okay, hang on, like we lost the plot. Let's break it back down. What was the first issue? Does anyone in the room remember? And if we do, let's go back to that. Let's resolve that. Do what we can to like make a promise toward change. And then, okay, what was the next thing that got brought up? Because if you brought it up, it must bother you. So let's talk that through. And a lot of it is just keeping ourselves as regulated as possible, taking those deep breaths, reminding us that like, that's not my enemy. It's my husband. I adore him. I love him. I want peace with him. I don't understand him a lot of the time, and that's okay, because he doesn't understand me either. And like, how can we create more connection in something that feels very severed?
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Really, like, lots to think about coming off the back of this episode. So I want to sort of bring it into a close now. So something I like to do at the end of an episode is ask my guest, which is you, to leave a question for the listener. So if the listener is listening here, then this question is for them to go away and to start a conversation with. So it can be with a family member, with a friend, a stranger, just to get them sort of talking about what they've listened to and into that conversation.
It's a really good question. I wish I was more prepared. I think more than anything, it would be somewhere around like, where do your values lie and whose are they?
Yeah.
Are those coming inherently from you because that really does mean a lot to you? Or is it something that was placed upon you and you never questioned it or thought you were allowed to? And so more than anything, I think it would be wrapped up into, if you gave yourself permission to consider being a transitional character, what would you work on first?
Great question. Great question.
Maybe a little too heavy, but
no, it's a great question. I think it sort of, dives into perfectly what we've spoken about today. So, Davina, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed it. If people want to sort of follow you online and keep up to date with what you're doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me anywhere. My handle everywhere is A Steady Space. And the whole point of that was just like, come in, find your balance and go back out into the world. So A Steady Space is where you'll find me. It's my website, all of my social media handles. We do have the parental shift every Thursday where we talk to parents about this exact stuff, and all of it included. This week was all about reactions and like where they come from and what we can do about them. So that is just at A Steady Space / the parental shift. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Sweet. I'll link some of it below so people can just go down and click on it as well. But yeah, thanks so much for coming on. To the listener, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do share it with someone who you think will find some value from it. If you haven't already, please do follow the show wherever you're listening, or subscribe if it's on YouTube. And if you want to follow on Instagram to keep up to date with what we're doing, it's at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly from me, thank you for listening and stay curious.